Welcome to Forum 360 for a global outlook with a local view. I'm Leslie Unger, your host today. When I was a very little girl, my favorite TV show was The Rifleman. Lucas McCain and his Winchester rifle saved the day for Sheriff Micah on a regular basis. However, my interest in law enforcement began and ended with that series. Our guest today is the Summit County Sheriff. It would be safe to say that her interest in law enforcement did not begin and end at the age of 6. She began her career as the first female police officer in Lakemore, is now the first female to serve as sheriff, and probably a lot of other firsts along the way. We met at an event last year. I told Kandy Fatheree that I was fascinated with a woman in her position. Can you imagine what it would be like to be the only female in the room, in your department? What if one of those men that perhaps gave you a hard time now report to you? Welcome, Summit County Sheriff Kandy Fatheree.
Thank you.
I always tell people, you have to be careful what you tell me, because I always remember. See, and I remember how interesting you were to talk to when I met you. So this is your reward or punishment, whichever way you want to look at it. From an outside perspective, it seems like your profession would be one of the hardest on women. It would be hard on a daily basis. It would be hard for promotion, for longer career goals. It would just be hard. So if you could go back 30 years, why did you choose law enforcement, especially as a single mom?
I have wanted to be in law enforcement since I was a small child. You said you watched TV. Well, I watched all the Westerns too, but that wasn't what made me decide to be in law enforcement. I came from a bad neighborhood. There was a lot of petty crime, basically. But I was the victim of a sexual assault, sexual abuse by a person in our neighborhood. And I always wanted to be rescued from this abuse, but I never told anybody. And so as time would go on, I thought about that, and it was one of those things of, I want to become a law enforcement officer so that I could save other people from having to go through that. Well, the thing that happened, though, is I would end up getting married, getting divorced, having a daughter, and in my early 30s, and hit a point in my life where it was, I just wanted to do what I needed to do in my heart. And so I went through the police academy, and the rest is history. That was 31 years ago.
So that would be your calling, was your experience with
sexual abuse.
Is kind of your catalyst.
Absolutely,
okay.
Being a victim.
So take us back to the police academy. You've said, I believe, that you paid for it as a single mom. I don't think that we think of paying for the academy. It never dawned on me. I guess I always just thought the city would pay for it. What was going to the police academy like 30 years ago, and has it changed for women?
So a lot of police departments you have to go through an academy first, and everybody pays for it. There's only a few police departments that actually pay you to go and pay for the academy. Akron Police Department is one of those, but the majority of the rest of them across the nation do not. So I had to pay to go through the academy. So I worked a full-time job during the day, and then I went part-time in the evenings, and then all day on Saturday. That started in February, it ended in August, and then I went through a month of Corrections Academy as well. So the academy I went through was the Summit County Sheriff's Office Academy in 1992.
Now, do you worry more, or do you just have to set that aside? But as a single mom, you pick a profession that perhaps has a higher injury or fatality rate. So do you worry about that as a single mom?
I didn't back then because I was young. I think that you worry to a degree, but in whatever profession you're in, I mean, you can get hurt no matter what, no matter where. It's just that I wanted so bad to do this job. And I was willing to pay a very difficult price in order to get there. So, you know, we had to wrestle, we had defensive tactics. There was a lot of physical involved in what we did. And during my career, there's been several physicals. But I told you, I grew up in a bad neighborhood. I have 3 brothers. I was used to fighting, so I was used to getting into physical confrontations. I mean, that's what kids do, right? So I wasn't overly concerned.
Now, you started at Lakemore.
I did.
Correct. Go back to that time. What was it like with your peers to be the first female officer, your community? I mean, I remember when Cuyahoga Falls got their first African-American mail carrier. A police car actually followed her around to make sure that, you know, she didn't...
She was safe?
Yes, yes. So, you know, I know that it's, you know, different people are different. Some embrace you, some don't. But overall, can you share any memories that you have of that time?
Yeah, there were a few of the guys that welcomed me with open arms. Very excited that I was there, because that meant that they wouldn't have to deal with some of the women that they dealt with, that they could call me. And then there were others that didn't feel that I had any business whatsoever being in law enforcement, and so I had to earn their respect.
Is it earnable? I mean, can you
Yes.
change someone's mind?
For some, you can.
Okay.
It's like with anything else.
Yeah.
For some, I was able to change their minds, but not with everybody. You know, there's always going to be somebody out there that has a bias, and just no matter what you do, you're never going to be accepted by them.
Now, after 3 years, you wanted to go to the sheriff's office.
Yes.
So I want to ask you why, and I want you to help us understand. You know, I've been fortunate to interview U.S. Marshal Pete Elliott, and I say that because I think we don't really understand all the different, you know, departments in law enforcement, the different options. So you're in a police department, you choose to go to the sheriff's. Can you tell us why and help us understand some of the differences between a police department and the sheriff's office?
Okay, so a police department, the police chief, first of all, is appointed by either the Board of Trustees or the mayor, okay? In a police department, your jurisdiction is just the boundaries of that community. So in Lakemore, it was just Lakemore. That's all I could affect, was that small 3-mile radius, okay? City of Akron Police Department is in specifically the city of Akron. Cuyahoga Falls in specifically the city of Cuyahoga Falls. But the sheriff's office is different. So the sheriff, first of all, is the only elected official, law enforcement official in the nation. No other law enforcement official is elected except the sheriff. That's the first thing. And then the second thing, the sheriff's office has the entire county, and then so we can go anywhere. So we can be in the southern part of the county, we can go to the northern part of the county, so we can police all over.
Now, what is your experience? I believe very much in our voting system, but sometimes I wonder, like, you look at judges, you look at sheriffs, what is your feeling from people? How well do they know what they're voting for, or how to make the decision who to vote for when it comes to a sheriff?
I think some people struggle with that. I think that most people will take the time to do a little bit of research. They'll at least read whatever is in the Beacon Journal or local papers, hear local TV. So they'll do a little research on it, but most people don't do a heavy research because they don't assume that it affects them that much.
So tell us 3 ways. You know, as a communication coach, I like things in threes. Tell us 3 ways that the person that is sheriff, whoever that is, can or does affect our everyday life in a county.
Well, the sheriff is responsible for the jail, the common police court, and patrol operations. And when I say operations, we are responsible for all the sex offenders, arsonists, and violent offender registrations, and follow-up. So we make sure that they are where they are supposed to be, doing what they're supposed to be doing. In the courts, we are the security for the courts. We handle all CPOs and civil protection orders.
Thank you.
And civil processes, summons to jury duty, to anything related to divorce papers being served or court papers themselves being served. So that's our civil process part. And then the other part is the county jail. And obviously the county jail affects everybody, because if your county jail is running efficiently, then your communities can get people in that need to be in, and to help to keep the rest of the community safe. So we affect those three things on a regular basis.
Now, okay, I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Let me ask you this. I know this is totally a not fair question, but I so want an answer. I don't know if there is an answer. A few years before COVID, I bought myself a day in a police ride-along. I always wanted to do that police ride-along. Didn't really know it was going to be a whole shift, but bought myself the whole shift, at some kind of a fundraiser. And I was in a police car with a young man, maybe in his late 30s, okay, not at the end of his career. And whenever we went on a call, I was always so surprised at what I felt was just this inherent bias against the woman. There was a man and a woman involved, whether it was a landlord and a situation or a domestic situation. I felt there was just this bias against women. I know you can't speak for all, but as a woman, can you talk at all about a bias, a change in the bias, a learning about anything, a training? Can you talk at all about where we're at with men and women, quote, victims?
Men and women victims?
When the woman is the victim calling the police. Okay,
so you're talking about officer response to a domestic situation for the most part, okay? I think that a lot more male officers are becoming more in tune to understanding both sides. I can't speak for all of them. I know that training has been initiated for law enforcement across the nation to try to help us address biases, because not only would possibly a man have a bias against a woman, but some female officers may be automatically biased against the male, making an assumption. So the objective, I think, in every call that we try to make is to try to go in with an open mind, listen to both sides. In a domestic where it's a partnership, where it's a man and woman or partners, regardless of who they are, and they're having a disagreement, we try to separate so that we get unbiased opinions and not be concerned with how they're going to, one's going to affect the other. So you separate, communicate. This officer communicates with this person, another officer communicates with the other person, and then the officers come together and make a determination as to what's going on. Because the truth is always somewhere in the middle.
Today we're talking with Summit County Sheriff Kandy Fatheree. Did you ever think of quitting?
No.
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 You kind of shake the stereotype of a police officer or a sheriff in many ways. Has that worked to your advantage?
Oh, absolutely. I don't look like anybody who came before me as far as sheriffs are concerned. 180 years of sheriffs in Summit County, and they've all been men. So I look very different than any of them. I also think very differently than they do. I have a different viewpoint and coming from a different background. Even through my entire career, it's all been different. How I've been treated, having to work a little harder to gain the same level of respect, changing direction because I wasn't one of the buddies, the friends. I went to work, I went home, and I didn't associate much with others. I had a family. So like most working women, you go to work and you do your job there, and then you go home and you have a job there too. And so when you're raising children, you're not out running around. So I think my whole career has been different. It's an entirely different vantage point and viewpoint. And truly, I think that having had that right now is probably the best opportunity for making change in law enforcement, because of the fact that my viewpoint's different.
So you talk about making change. If your magic wand worked, what is the first change that you would make? If you could make any change, what is the first change that you would make? That you needed no input, no one to agree with you, no funding, you could make any change.
I think the biggest change is full community relations from both sides. Public's perception of law enforcement to be more open-minded, and law enforcement's perception of public to be, again, more open-minded, more collaborative, more community-oriented. That's the biggest change.
If there was one thing that you thought that any of us that are not in law enforcement get wrong about our thinking about law enforcement, there was one thing that we don't understand, and there are some things, I can't understand what it's like to serve in Iraq. I haven't served in Iraq. If there was one thing that we don't understand, what would that be?
Law enforcement officers are human beings, and remember that every call that they receive and that they go to is a bad situation, a horrendous situation for every person that's involved. So they go from bad call to bad call to bad call. They're never called to your home so that they can have cake and ice cream for a birthday party. It's because you are having a horrible time and something bad has happened. So a lifetime of seeing some of the human beings' worst and dealing with that on a daily basis, year after year, day after day, it's difficult.
So are there resources, and how much is up to, say, you, the sheriff, or your department, how much is up to the individual to say whether I'm burned out or I need some kind of help? Just a few days ago, I had 2 dogs, and I had to help one cross over to Rainbow Bridge. I now have 1 dog, and that is hard, and I just keep seeing that day, and I can't imagine how many hundreds of bad scenes you have to, whose responsibility is it for mental health to say I need help? And is that even something that someone can ask for and not be penalized?
Absolutely. So first of all, Summit County has a program. Summit County offices have a program that we can send them to for mental health assistance. But the other thing that I did is I did 2 things. I hired a full-time chaplain that is a law enforcement officer at the sheriff's office, and that chaplain's job is to take care of our staff. We have started watching one another, encouraging one another, and when we see something or when we have a bad situation, we debrief afterwards, giving the officers an opportunity to be able to talk about it. And we encourage the talking, we encourage communication, we encourage speaking with our chaplain, and the religion doesn't matter, just the fact that you have somebody who is, you can talk to, that is not allowed to share what you say with anybody. And we also encourage the program with the county executive's office as well, human resources. So we are really pushing mental health. Mental health with law enforcement is critical, but see, I believe it's more than just our men and women in uniform. I push mental health opportunities for our mentally ill in our jail. More than 60% of the people in my jail have a mental health condition. And so we are really trying to address mental health overall, so within my inmate population and my staff themselves. It's critical.
Now, you've got a lot on your plate every day. Do you see young people on any kind of regular basis, or just, I mean, you just being in uniform and stopping at the gas station is a different message than we see. So my question is, you know, we in Akron had for a time, you know, a female superintendent that said it made a difference to young people to see a female in that role. Amelia Sykes said the same thing as a female congresswoman, that for young people to see, I mean, every time someone sees you, you know, you're giving a different message. Do people say anything to you? Do kids say, or mothers or grandmothers say anything to you?
Constantly.
What do they say?
Whenever I'm out, people, first of all, most people thank us for our service. And then children especially, children and teenagers, they always want to talk and touch and ask questions. And I think that all the interactions that I have with the public have been very, very positive. I think that high school kids, especially girls, seem to be genuinely interested in the fact that I'm a woman and I'm a sheriff. I mean, in Ohio, there's only 3 of us. There's only ever been 4 elected in the entire history of Ohio. So we're unique.
Now, I alluded to in the introduction something you said to me when I met you. So you have this 30-year career. Some men that gave you a hard time, now you may be their boss. Tell us about that. Like, how much grace do you have? How forgiving are you?
I'm very forgiving. I think that as time goes on, you can't make it in this career and hold grudges. You just can't. You have to just pick up and go on and continue to strive forward. So I have a lot of grace in that aspect. You should be rewarded, truly you should be rewarded for what it is that you contribute and what you do. You should be respected for the position that you hold, no matter what that position is.
Now, I have 2 questions about physical fitness.
Okay.
One is, you know, as I mentioned to you, I get all my information, you know, about law enforcement from Blue Bloods, okay? So keep that in mind, okay? But it's my understanding that at least in some, you know, departments, you have to pass a test to get in, but then you don't pass a test again once you're in.
That is correct.
And so that, I think the public kind of wonders sometimes, you know, when we see some people that may surprise us, you know, physically to be police officers. But the other part of my question is, how much harder is it on women? Do they have to pass the same kind of tests to become any kind of law enforcement officer?
So currently in the state of Ohio, when you go through the police academy, they have a physical fitness requirement, and it's called the Cooper Standards. And it's push-ups, set-ups, and a 1.5 mile run. And it's based on age and gender. So you have to be able to pass a low standard to be able to get into the academy. And then you must do the physical component of it, and then pass the required minimum standard at the end of the academy. And if you don't pass it, you don't graduate. So everything is for nothing.
But then once you pass it,
it just depends on
forever?
It just depends on the police department and whether or not that police department has standards, physical standards, and most don't.
In a couple words, can you tell us what makes a good chief or a bad chief? Or
Leadership.
A good sheriff or a bad sheriff?
Leadership.
How do we know that? As a community member, how do we know?
You have to do your homework on them, but you can tell by the way that the organization is, how it's running, if there's a good leader at the helm.
In a couple words, what gives you hope?
My faith.
How much does this job shake your faith?
Not often. I've seen some horrible things, what human beings do to one another, but not often. My faith is very strong. I absolutely believe that this is a calling and that I'm supposed to be here at this time.
Are there some aspects of the job that women are better at than men?
Absolutely. I think communication is probably the biggest.
I found myself in a mall with a lockdown, active shooter. and a lockdown. And I was grateful for listening to every FBI profiler I listened to on TV. What is something that you think community members need to be more aware of? What is one thing we need to be more aware of in our everyday life than we are?
Your surroundings. Stop looking at your phone when you're walking from a store to your home and from your home to your car. Be aware of your surroundings.
And probably, maybe the most important question, are you a Swenson's or Skyway person?
Neither.
Neither?
I eat more chicken than I do burgers.
As we go about our normal lives, we depend on people to protect us in our communities, people we often will never meet or know by name. Today we had the opportunity to meet and talk with one of those people who wake up every day with the goal of preventing crime within our county, Summit County Sheriff Kandy Fatheree. Sometimes we convince ourselves of all of our can'ts. We can't do something because we're a single mom or because we're not tall enough or short enough or we've never done it before. And again, I would say Summit County Sheriff Kandy Fatheree has broken a lot of stereotypes along the way to breaking a few glass ceilings. Thank you all for joining us today on Forum 360. I'm Leslie Unger, your host.
Forum 360 is brought to you by John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, the Akron Community Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron, Blue Green, Electric Impulse Communications, and Forum 360 supporters.